She thought she could outsmart a man who'd faced death in the desert. Karen's smug grin as she waved her forged papers was the kind of arrogance that made my trigger finger itch. This wasn't just about land or rules, it was personal, and she'd crossed a line by targeting my daughter, Ellie. My name's Jack Tanner, ex-Special Forces, now a rancher in the sprawling Nevada outback, where the only law is what you carve out for yourself. I'd seen plenty of snakes in my time, but none as venomous as Karen Whitaker, the self-proclaimed queen of the Pine Valley HOA, who thought she could bully her way into stealing my home and my kid. It started 3 months ago, when Karen rolled up in her shiny SUV, her bleach blonde hair as fake as her smile. Pine Valley was no gated community, it was a scattered collection of ranches, each owner fiercely independent. But Karen had a vision: turn our dusty paradise into her personal fiefdom, complete with manicured lawns and HOA fees nobody could afford. She'd been harassing neighbors for months, slapping liens on properties with her fabricated violations. Most folks caved, too tired or broke to fight. Not me. I'd built this ranch from nothing, raised Ellie here after her mom passed. This land was our blood, our sweat, and I'd be damned if some clipboard-wielding tyrant took it. Karen's latest stunt was a forged document claiming my ranch violated some obscure county code. She'd gotten bolder, showing up unannounced, citing fines I owed. I told her to shove her papers where the sun didn't shine, but she didn't stop. Then she went too far. Last week, I caught her cornering Ellie at the school bus stop, whispering lies about how Daddy's in trouble and how she'd find Ellie a better home. My blood boiled. Ellie ran to me, tears streaming, clutching my leg like I was her only anchor. That night, I cleaned my old service rifle, not because I wanted to use it, but because Karen needed to know who she was dealing with. Today, she'd pushed me to the edge. I was fixing a fence post when her SUV screeched up, kicking up dust that stung my eyes. She stepped out, heels sinking into the dirt, waving a new set of papers. "Jack, you're done," she sneered, her voice dripping with fake pity. "This ranch is a hazard. The county's taking it, and Ellie. She deserves better than a deadbeat like you." I froze, my grip tightening on the hammer. Ellie was inside, safe for now, but Karen's words cut deeper than any blade. She wasn't just after my land, she wanted to rip my family apart. I stepped closer, my voice low, steady, the kind I used in combat to make men flinch. "You think you can scare me with your fake papers? I've faced worse than you in Fallujah." Her eyes flickered, but she doubled down, pulling out her phone, claiming she'd called Child Protective Services. That's when I saw red. I didn't shout, I didn't need to. I told her to leave, or she'd regret it. She laughed, that high-pitched cackle that made my skin crawl, and said, "You're nothing, Jack. Just a washed-up soldier playing cowboy." That's when Ellie's scream pierced the air. I spun around to see her running from the house, her face pale, pointing at Karen's assistant, a weaselly guy named Greg, sneaking toward my barn with a can of gasoline. The bastard was planning to torch my property, make it look like neglect. My training kicked in. I sprinted, tackling Greg before he could light a match. He squirmed, whining about just following orders, but I zip-tied his hands with a cable from my pocket. Karen's face twisted in panic, but she still had the gall to yell, "You can't touch me. I'm untouchable." I dragged Greg to his feet, shoving him toward her. "You're not untouchable," I said, my voice ice-cold. "You're a fraud, and I've got proof." I'd been digging into her scams for weeks, collecting emails, forged documents, and testimonies from neighbors she'd fleeced. I'd even hacked her public HOA record skills from my military days never fade. Her empire was built on lies, and I was ready to burn it down. But first, I had to protect Ellie. I called my neighbor, Tom, a retired sheriff, to watch her while I dealt with Karen. The standoff was electric. Karen, Greg, and I stood in a triangle, the desert wind howling between us. Her eyes darted, calculating, but I saw the fear creeping in. She wasn't used to resistance. "You think you've won?" she spat, clutching her phone like a lifeline. CPS is coming. They'll take Ellie by tonight. My heart pounded, but I kept my face stone. I'd faced insurgents who played dirtier than her. I stepped closer, my rifle slung over my shoulder, not aimed, but a reminder. You don't know who you're messing with, I said. I've got evidence that'll put you in jail for fraud, extortion, and endangerment. Walk away now, or I end this my way. She laughed again, but it was shaky. Greg whimpered, still zip-tied, begging her to back off. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that made her look small, desperate. I could have ended it, recalled the cops, handed over my proof. But Karen wasn't done. She lunged for her car, pulling out a manila envelope. This is your last chance, Jack, she hissed, tossing it at my feet. Sign over the ranch, or I ruin you and Ellie both. I picked it up, glancing at the papers inside. More forgeries, but one caught my eye, a fake adoption form with Ellie's name on it. My vision tunneled. This wasn't just a land grab. She was trying to take my daughter, legally or not. I dropped the envelope, my voice barely a whisper. You're done, Karen. I radioed Tom, who was already on his way with the county deputy. I'd sent him my evidence folder last night, insurance in case things went south. Karen's face paled as she heard the sirens in the distance. She bolted for her SUV, but I was faster, slamming the door shut before she could climb in. Not this time, I said, my hand on her wrist, firm but controlled. She screamed, flailing, but I held her until Tom's truck pulled up. The deputy cuffed Greg first, then turned to Karen, who was still ranting about her rights. I handed over the envelope and my evidence, watching her empire crumble in real time. Ellie ran out, throwing her arms around me, sobbing but safe. I knelt, hugging her tight, promising I'd never let anyone take her. But as the deputy hauled Karen away, her eyes locked on mine, venomous, promising revenge. I knew this wasn't over. People like her don't quit, they fester. And I'd be ready. The dust from the deputy's truck hadn't even settled when I felt Ellie's small hand tremble in mine. Her eyes, wide and glassy, followed Karen's SUV as it disappeared down the dirt road, flanked by flashing lights. Is she gone, Daddy? Ellie whispered, her voice barely audible over the desert wind. I knelt, brushing a tear from her cheek, and forced a smile. For now, kiddo. But we don't let our guard down. My words were steady, but inside, my gut churned. Karen Whitaker wasn't the type to slink away quietly. I'd seen her kind before, cunning, relentless, the kind of enemy who waits for you to blink before striking again. I sent Ellie inside with Tom's wife, Maria, who'd shown up with a thermos of coffee and a fierce mama bear glare. Maria was a retired nurse, tough as nails, and she'd taken to Ellie like her own. Go on, sweetheart, Maria said, guiding Ellie toward the house. We'll bake those cookies you like. Ellie nodded, still clutching my old flannel shirt, and I watched her go, my heart heavy. This ranch was supposed to be her safe haven, not a battleground. I turned to Tom, who was leaning against his truck, chewing on a toothpick. You think she'll come back? He asked, squinting at the horizon. She will, I said, my voice flat. People like her don't stop until they're buried. Tom grunted, spitting into the dirt. He'd seen the evidence I'd gathered: forged liens, doctored emails, even a fake county seal on Karen's official documents. It was enough to lock her up for fraud, but I knew better than to trust the system to finish her off. Karen had connections, money, and a knack for slithering out of trouble. I'd learned that the hard way, digging into her past. She'd pulled similar scams in 2 other counties, leaving families homeless and bankrupted before vanishing like smoke. This time, she'd picked the wrong fight. I spent the next hour securing the ranch. I checked the fences, locked the barn, and hid my evidence folder in a safe buried under the floorboards, a trick from my military days. Tom stayed, his shotgun resting casually on his shoulder, while we talked strategy. You need to go public, he said. Get the neighbors together, expose her before she spins this. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. Karen's adoption form with Ellie's name haunted me. It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. She'd targeted my daughter to break me, and that was a mistake she'd pay for. By nightfall, I'd called a meeting at the old community barn, a weathered structure where Pine Valley's ranchers gathered for emergencies. Word spread fast, and by 8 o'clock, 24 neighbors packed the place, their faces a mix of anger and exhaustion. I stood on a hay bale, holding up Karen's forged papers. This is what she's been doing, I said, my voice carrying over the murmurs. She's not just after my land, she's hit half of you with her lies. Fines, liens, threats. She tried to take my daughter, claiming I'm unfit. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Old man Carter, who'd lost his orchard to Karen's schemes, slammed his fist on a table. That witch needs to be run out of town. I laid out the evidence, screenshots of her emails, recordings of her threatening voicemails, and the fake adoption form. The room erupted in shouts, but I raised a hand. We don't mob her, I said. We do this smart. File charges, go to the press, hit her where it hurts her wallet and her reputation. The ranchers agreed, forming a plan to pool resources for a lawyer. But as we talked, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You'll regret this, Jack. Ellie's not safe. My blood ran cold. I showed Tom, who cursed under his breath. She's got help, he said. Someone's feeding her info. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch, rifle across my lap, listening to the coyotes howl. Ellie was safe inside, curled up with Maria, but Karen's threat gnawed at me. I'd faced ambushes in war zones, but this was different, personal, dirty, and unpredictable. At dawn, I drove to the sheriff's office, handing over the new threat. The deputy, a young guy named Ruiz, promised to trace the number, but his face said he didn't expect much. She's lawyered up already, he admitted. Got some hotshot from Vegas claiming she's the victim. I clenched my jaw, nodding. Karen was playing chess, and I was still a move behind. The next day, I took Ellie to school myself, watching every car in the rearview. She was quiet, clutching her backpack, and I hated how this fight was stealing her childhood. Daddy, why does that lady hate us? She asked as we pulled up. I forced a grin. Some people just want what's ours, kiddo. But they won't get it. She hugged me, and I held her a second longer than usual, memorizing the feel of her small arms. As she ran to class, I scanned the parking lot. A black sedan lingered across the street, too clean for Pine Valley. I memorized the plate and called Ruiz. That afternoon, the ranchers met again, this time with a lawyer named Susan, a no-nonsense woman who'd fought HOAs before. She reviewed my evidence and whistled. This is a goldmine, Jack. Fraud, extortion, maybe even kidnapping if we can prove intent with that adoption form. She promised to file a class action suit, but warned it'd take months. I didn't have months. Karen was escalating, and I needed to end this now. I spent the evening wiring cameras around the ranch, setting up motion sensors. If she came back, I'd catch her. 2 nights later, it happened. The sensors blared at 3 a.m., yanking me from a shallow sleep. I grabbed my rifle and checked the feet. A figure in a hoodie was creeping toward the barn, carrying something heavy. I slipped outside, moving silently like I'd been trained. The figure was Greg, Karen's lackey, freed on bail and dumber than ever. He was rigging a pipe bomb, crude but deadly. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. I tackled him from behind, pinning him in the dirt. Who sent you? I growled, twisting his arm. He sobbed, spilling everything. Karen had paid him to blow up the barn, make it look like an accident, and force me out. I zip-tied him again, called Ruiz, and waited for the deputies. But as they hauled Greg away, my phone buzzed again. Another text, nice try, Jack. You can't protect her forever. I stared at the screen, rage boiling over. Karen wasn't just a scammer, she was a predator, and she was still out there, watching. I drove to Ellie's school at dawn, pulling her out early. Maria agreed to take her to a safe house 2 counties over. I hated splitting us up, but I needed Ellie out of the crosshairs. Back at the ranch, I dug deeper. Using old military contacts, I traced Karen's network. She wasn't working alone, her Vegas lawyer was dirty, tied to a real estate cartel that thrived on flipping rural properties. They'd been bankrolling her scams, and Pine Valley was their latest target. I sent the info to Susan, who filed an emergency injunction to freeze Karen's assets. But I knew legal moves wouldn't stop her obsession. She wanted my land, my daughter, my life. That night, I set a trap. I leaked a fake story through a neighbor that I was leaving town, abandoning the ranch. Karen took the bait. At midnight, her SUV rolled up, alone. She stepped out, holding a flashlight and a crowbar, heading for the house. I watched from the shadows, my rifle ready but my plan clear, no blood, just justice. I hit the floodlights, blinding her, and stepped out. Game over, Karen, I said, my voice echoing. She froze, then lunged for her car, but Tom and Ruiz emerged from the darkness, cuffs ready. Karen's flashlight clattered to the ground, its beam cutting wild arcs through the dust. Her face, caught in the floodlights, was a mask of shock and fury, her carefully crafted facade crumbling like the cheap forgeries she peddled. You can't do this, Jack, she shrieked, her voice shrill enough to spook the coyotes. I stepped closer, my boots crunching on the gravel, rifle slung low but unmistakable. You're trespassing, Karen, I said, my tone calm but iron hard. And you're done. Tom and Deputy Ruiz flanked her, their faces grim. She spun, looking for an escape, but the desert offered none. For the first time, Karen Whitaker was trapped. She tried to bolt anyway, lunging for her SUV, but Ruiz was faster, grabbing her arm and snapping on the cuffs. You're under arrest for trespassing, attempted arson, and conspiracy to commit fraud, he said, his voice clipped. Karen thrashed, spitting curses, but I didn't flinch. I'd seen worse in warsonsmen who'd sell their souls for $1, just like her. As Ruiz read her rights, Tom handed me a nod. Good work, Jack. We got her. But I wasn't celebrating yet. Karen's eyes locked on mine, burning with a promise of vengeance. I knew this wasn't the end, not by a long shot. They hauled her to the squad car, her screams fading into the night. I stood there, watching the taillights disappear, my heart still racing. The ranch was quiet again, but the silence felt heavy, like the calm before a sandstorm. I checked the cameras, replaying the footage of Karen creeping toward my house. She'd come alone, no backup, which meant she was desperate or her allies had cut her loose. Either way, I wasn't taking chances. I radioed Maria to confirm Ellie was safe at the safe house. She's fine, Jack, Maria said, her voice warm but firm. Focus on finishing this. I thanked her and hung up, my resolve hardening. This was my land, my daughter, my fight. The next morning, I met Susan, the lawyer, at the sheriff's office. She'd been up all night, combing through my evidence and the new charges against Karen. This is airtight, she said, tapping a stack of papers. Fraud, extortion, attempted arson, and that fake adoption form. We're looking at felony kidnapping charges if we can prove intent. I nodded, but my mind was on the cartel behind Karen. They were the real threat, the ones pulling her strings. Susan agreed to dig deeper, targeting their financials, while I planned my next move. I wasn't just fighting for my ranch anymore, this was about protecting Pine Valley, every last stubborn, dusty acre of it. By noon, the news broke. A local reporter, tipped off by Tom, ran a story exposing Karen's scams. The headline screamed, HOA fraudster targets families, caught in act. Social media exploded, with neighbors sharing their own horror stories about Karen's threats. The Pine Valley ranchers rallied, organizing a press conference at the community barn. I stood with them, recounting how she tried to take Ellie, my voice steady but raw. The crowd, ranchers, farmers, even some city folks who'd driven out, cheered when I held up the forged adoption form. "This isn't just about me," I said. "It's about all of us standing up to bullies who think they can steal our homes, our lives." The pressure worked. By evening, Karen's Vegas lawyer dropped her, citing irreconcilable conflicts. Her cartel backers went silent, their shell companies scrambling to cover tracks. But I wasn't naive. Snakes like that don't vanish, they hide. I kept my cameras on, my rifle cleaned, and my contacts on speed dial. Ellie came home that night, her small frame barreling into me for a hug that nearly knocked me over. "Is it over, Daddy?" she asked, her voice muffled against my chest. I wanted to say yes, but I couldn't lie. "We're getting there, kiddo," I said, kissing her forehead. "But we're tougher than they are." Days turned to weeks, and the legal battleground on. Karen was denied bail, her list of charges growing as more victims came forward. Susan filed the class action suit, naming the cartel as co-conspirators. The ranchers chipped in, their anger fueling a fund that kept Susan's team working overtime. But the victory felt hollow. Every night, I checked the locks, scanned the horizon, and wondered if I'd missed something. Karen's last text, "You can't protect her forever," echoed in my head. I'd won this round, but at what cost? Ellie was safe, but she'd seen too much, her innocence chipped away by a woman's greed. Then came the gut punch. One morning, as I was fixing breakfast for Ellie, Ruiz called. "Jack, we found something," he said, his voice tight. Karen had a burner phone in her cell. She was texting someone orders to keep eyes on you and Ellie. My stomach dropped. "Who?" I asked, gripping the phone. Ruiz hesitated. "We don't know yet. The number's encrypted, but it's tied to Vegas. Likely her cartel friends." I thanked him and hung up, my hands shaking. I looked at Ellie, giggling over her pancakes, oblivious to the storm still brewing. I'd fought wars, but this one felt endless. That night, I sat Ellie down. "We're going on a trip," I said, keeping my tone light. "A little adventure, just you and me." Her eyes lit up, but I saw the worry beneath. I'd rented a cabin in Montana, far from Pine Valley, under a fake name. Until the cartel was dismantled, we couldn't stay. I packed light clothes, cash, my rifle, and the evidence folder. As we drove out at dawn, the ranch fading in the rearview, I felt a pang of loss. This land was my heart, but Ellie was my soul. I'd burn it all down to keep her safe. Montana was cold, quiet, a world away from the desert. Ellie loved the snow, building forts while I kept watch. Susan called weekly, updating me on the case. The cartel was cracking, their accounts frozen, but they were fighting dirty, intimidating witnesses, bribing officials. I stayed sharp, teaching Ellie basic self-defense, framing it as a game. She was tough, like her mom, but I hated that she had to be. One night, as we sat by the fire, she asked, "Daddy, why do people like that lady hurt others?" I struggled for an answer. "Some folks are broken inside," I said finally. "They think taking from others fixes them. It doesn't." Months later, Susan delivered the news. Karen pleaded guilty to avoid a trial, sentenced to 15 years. The cartel's leaders were indicted, their empire collapsing under federal scrutiny. Pine Valley was safe, the ranchers reclaiming their homes. I brought Ellie back, her laughter filling the ranch again. But as we rebuilt, the scars remained. I'd protected my daughter, my land, but the cost was heavy, trust shattered, innocence lost. Karen was gone, but her shadow lingered, a reminder that evil doesn't always carry a gun. Sometimes, it wears a fake smile and carries a clipboard. As I tucked Ellie into bed that first night back, she whispered, "You're my hero, Daddy." I smiled, but my heart ached. Heroes don't let their kids live in fear. I kissed her goodnight, checked the cameras one last time, and stepped onto the porch. The desert stretched out, vast and unforgiving, but it was ours. I'd fought for it, for her, and I'd do it again. But deep down, I knew the truth: no victory is final. Not when people like Karen exist. And that bitter truth was the hardest fight of all.